push boxes, and that's pretty much it in Mina and Michi. Is puzzle solving preferable with a pal?
Mina Michi features a top-down perspective with 2D pixel graphics that are very simple, but not completely without charm. There is very little variety in the environments, and enemies are simple round jelly monsters that vary only in color. For such a small game, the graphics are cute and serviceable. At the very least, everything in the game is clear and distinguishable.
Gameplay in Mina and Michi is a mix of box-pushing puzzles and simplistic combat, broken up by a surprising amount of Zelda-esque exploration. Progression requires opening doors by defeating enemies, solving puzzles, and collecting keys, with the ultimate goal of unlocking the path to the boss of a given region. Each room has obstacles in the form of enemies, traps, simple puzzles, or a combination of all of these. Many of the rooms branch off into multiple other rooms, requiring exploration and a good amount of backtracking. It's not a big world, but traversing it is artificially complicated by the lack of any sort of map, as well as the fact that enemies respawn when you re-enter a room. This makes it occasionally difficult to determine where you are or remember where you've been, especially if you exit out of the game and return on a different day.
Puzzles make up the bulk of the gameplay. You'll need to push boxes in order to press switches that open up doors to allow further exploration. None of the puzzles are difficult, but some require a decent amount of planning or trial and error. You're only able to push boxes, not pull, so it's possible to mess up in ways that will require you to restart a puzzle by exiting and re-entering the room, which could mean having to navigate the same traps and defeat the same enemies again. But puzzles are quite short, and even the hardest take only a few attempts to figure out. Most of the combat is even simpler than the puzzles. Both characters have combat capabilities. Mina has a ranged attack, while Michi has a spinning melee attack. But while Mina has health that can be depleted, Michi takes no damage, leading to a repetitive strategy of parking Mina in a safe place while Michi clears out a room. The 3 boss fights offer the most challenge in the game because they take a lot of damage to defeat, and they attack a much larger area, so it's more difficult for Mina to stay alive while Michi chips away at the boss's health. The single-player mode has both characters controlled by the same player, so we imagine the boss fights might be even more difficult when needing to keep track of both. The relative difficulty of the boss fights can be mitigated by upgrades found throughout the world that increase Mina's health. Beyond the basic progression, there are a few optional puzzles and chests that can be opened using golden keys. All of the chests we found only contained a handful of gems, which are found all around the world while walking through grass, or dropped by defeated enemies. Usually, golden keys are locked behind gates, which require gems to open. Chests always contain much fewer gems than what was required to access them, so it was often a waste of resources to do so. That said, it's also the only thing that gems are used for, so the whole mechanic of collecting gems and opening chests felt a little pointless. Beyond some quirkiness with the control scheme, we didn't experience any bugs or technical issues for the length of our playthrough.
Two-player Mina and Michi is somewhat asymmetric. Player 1 controls Mina, who can take damage and dies after losing all their health, while Player 2 controls Michi, who doesn't take damage and is therefore safe to walk through traps and take out enemies. In a normal room, it's simple enough for Player 1 to sit in safety for a minute while Player 2 defeats enemies. But in trap-heavy rooms or boss fights, Player 1 might have a real challenge just staying alive, so the person who's best at dodging attacks should probably be Player 1. One of the weirdest features is Player 1 can switch immediately between single-player and co-op with the press of a button, which led us to accidentally switching the mode a couple times during our playthrough, and Player 2 losing all control until we realized what happened. As far as puzzles go, both players have the same amount of block-pushing ability, and many of the puzzles do encourage working together. Players share a screen, and neither player is prioritized by the camera. The usual co-op tug-of-war is present, where players aren't allowed to get too far from each other. It isn't really a problem in this game because there's rarely more than 1 or 2 things to do in a room, and there's no reason to separate from your partner other than the occasional combat encounter.
Each room takes very little time to get through, and autosaving is frequent, making the game great for short play sessions, except for the potential confusion of coming back to the game with a lack of map and no indication of where you've been or where you're supposed to go. Although perfectly playable solo with a seamless transition between modes, the game definitely feels comfortable when played co-op. There's always the opportunity for both players to be engaged in the game, and the puzzles require the right amount of planning that encourages discussion and teamwork between players, but without ever feeling frustrating.
The game has minimal story, and that's to say, it basically has no story. It begins with a few still images and text that establishes the character's friendship, but it doesn't present any context, motivation, or goals for their adventure. Considering that the theme of friendship shines a bit through the gameplay, it's disappointing that no effort was made to push it further using even a basic story. And considering how tedious the gameplay loop of looking for keys and doors gets, it's a shame that the game doesn't give you any reason to open gates and fight monsters.
Mina and Michi is a short and simple indie game that feels organically cooperative, but it's likely to be too short and too simple for most. There's not much value here, but at its price point, it's a decently fun game for any skill level. It's a bit confusing to play over multiple sessions with its lack of map or objective markers, but if you're in the mood for an easy, relaxing game to finish in an evening with a partner, this is one we'd recommend.